This film contains stories that some viewers may find difficult. Support is available Australia-wide through Lifeline on 13 11 14 or QLife LGBTQIA+ on 1800 184 527. What Parents Want. Talking about gender and sexuality diversity in schools. Draws on the findings from Australian research that investigated the experiences of parents of gender and sexuality diverse young people and their experiences of attending school. The actors are using the words of some of the parent participants. Our research highlighted that gender and sexuality diverse kids come from a diverse range of families, including families living in cities, regional and remote areas of Australia, families where parents were born in Europe, Asia, Africa and the Americas, and speak a variety of different languages at home. Families where parents identify as Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim, and as not religious. Part 1, This Is Us, Introducing Our Children, presents 6 parent voices, or mothers, who talk about their child's experiences of identifying as gender and or sexuality diverse.
Emma, who we're talking about today, is my transgender child. She was born male. Emma is 9. It was getting clearer that she just couldn't keep pretending to be a boy. And that's how she felt. She said she thought it was a lie. She had all her girly things in her bedroom that if she had friends over, you'd have to put them all away. She didn't want to go out of the house because she'd have to get changed into boy clothes. So it got to the point at school where she really couldn't concentrate because she was so focused on presenting more like a girl. She had feminine mannerisms and was obsessed about what things were girl things and what things were boy things. She didn't want to go to the boys' toilets anymore, and I was getting phone calls to say come and pick her up from school.
My child is River. They prefer the they pronoun, which we're all struggling with a little bit because it's plural. River announced they were gender fluid probably 18 months ago. They would have been 11 and a half at the time. River feels very clear that they're not in the wrong body, but feels that they don't feel feminine, don't like feminine things, don't feel like a girl. So River had this big, thick, beautiful, curly, shoulder-length hair, which was kind of the thing that everybody knew them by. River decided that they wanted to shave it all off. So we shave it every 6 weeks. So it's really short. It suits them. Yeah, they look amazing. Like, River's got a very androgynous body. Like, they're tall, very lean, so they easily pass as a boy, or they pass as somewhere in the middle. Like, they wear boys' clothes and is easily mistaken for male. With old people, they'll go, "Oh, your son's so lovely." And then you see them kind of going, wait, hold on, and looking a bit confused and embarrassed. And River just goes, "Thank you," and moves on.
My son Asher is 15, nearly 16. Asher is slightly gender non-conforming. He's in no way genderqueer, but he doesn't necessarily follow the rules in the way he presents. So he likes to wear women's jewellery sometimes and that kind of stuff. So at some point he decided that he was bi. Heterosexuality hasn't been assumed as much in his entire schooling life as it certainly was for any of our generation. Every now and then the stuff he says surprises me in terms of how different the attitudes are amongst him and his peers than they were for me and actually are for me now. Ash has always felt like he was part of his school community, even if things weren't going terribly well.
Geordie's just turned 14, so she's about to head into year 9 in high school. in year 5 of primary school, I started to see some changes in her. She started showing interest in her body and in other kids. She hit puberty very early, at 10 years old, and so went through rapid physical growth and emotional turmoil, really, because she was so young. She began to know a bit more about herself, and so at 11, she came out. She realised at that point she was interested in girls. I think she was a bit afraid to tell her parents, my ex and myself, just in case, probably in case we didn't take her seriously because she was so young. We just said, you know, it's great that you're starting to understand this about yourself. Anyway, that vision of herself has never really changed. And from that point, she started to independently research sexualities and genders and became very, very aware. So, for example, at 12, she announced one night at dinner that there was a sexuality and gender type for each day of the month. So there were 32 recognised ones at that point. She was doing all this independent research on her own.
From my point of view, pre-transition there's Rory and post-transition there's Meg. By 2.5 years old, my son had rejected all boys' toys, rejected playing with boys, told us he didn't like his body, wouldn't listen to his name or respond even to it. At 2.5, he watched a movie called Frozen and the lights just went on. From that moment, it was just all girl stuff, dresses. The preschool at the time was very open, but were very concerned. And they said, if your child comes dressed as a girl every day, that other parents might be concerned about that. We were having tantrums, 1.5 hour long tantrums, if you put the shorts on.
I have twins. They're 14. They were both born male. And then last year in October, one of my twins said to me that, I think that my brother is having gender identity issues. I asked my then son and he said, yes, I am. It was apparent that this had been bothering him for some time. He'd been depressed and anxious and we didn't understand why for years. He then transitioned and became she. In December, we chose her name, Bridget, with her, and she's now 14 and lives as a girl, goes to school as a girl, and yeah, is doing really relatively well. And she's on estrogen now, and so she's socially and medically transitioning, and at 18, she'll have gender confirmation surgery.
Emma was adamant she was changing socially to a girl. She'd picked a name, she'd been seeing a counsellor that had given us some of the tools to cope with the change. The school was very accommodating because I think they could see it was getting to the point for Emma she couldn't continue. On the last day of school, she took off that school uniform and put girl clothes on, and that was it. There was no stopping her. I'm guided a little bit by Emma, who is very happy where she is right now. She feels that she's completely a girl. She goes to friends' birthday parties and has sleepovers, and in a way, I feel like at this point, she doesn't want to be viewed by others as different. Like, she does ballet outside of school and she won't let me tell the other ballet girls that she's transgender. I do worry sometimes that it's not great, that going under the radar is how she's learned to cope. We need to have something out there so that Emma can accept that being transgender is okay. Because right now, being transgender is okay only if no one knows you're transgender.
River felt quite confident that their friends would be okay about them coming out as gender fluid. They're all pretty bright, engaged kids, interested in the world, wanting to be doing the right thing kind of kids. So we role-played what River could say. River told the friends at school, and they all jumped up and hugged River and said, "We love you and we're so proud of you and thank you for telling us." Just the cutest, most beautiful response ever. Amazing. And they're all like 12 and 13-year-olds. Like, it just makes me cry. I could not have wanted more of them. I am so glad it went so beautifully for them. River's friends asked all these really great questions like, so what pronouns should we use? What about the teachers? Do you want us to correct teachers if they use the wrong pronouns? What about other kids asking questions?
If we had just moved schools and she'd started as Meg, that would have been a completely different story. But because she actually socially transitioned in kindergarten, where all those kids know, it's now become a major problem for her. So she has this secret that she has boy parts. Internally, I think she's dealing with, I have a secret I'm not allowed to tell anyone, but everything in my school tells me to tell the truth. Then where do I live in that world? Because at school, in kindergarten, it's all about telling the truth, being honest and sharing about yourself. So she has a lot of anxiety about what if someone finds out and they tell the whole school? What will that look like for me? Her first question all the time is, does this teacher know about me, Mummy? She's constantly hypervigilant about protecting herself at school. She's mimicking the girls to make sure she looks like them. So dress-up days, mufti days, book week days, any day that you can imagine where they get to choose their own outfit is problematic, very problematic. Because if I look too girly, what will that mean? It's hypervigilant, constant.
In Part 2, School Encounters, parents talk about their child's school experiences. Parents share the real stories about their gender and sexuality diverse child's interactions and experiences at school.
Geordie went into year 7 maybe a little naively. So in year 7, she was quite open about sexuality. She had trust in her peers and so was engaging in that kind of talk in the same way that all the kids were engaging in that talk. What I think shocked her was how people, her peer group, responded. So in the first instance, she was called names, particularly by the boys in year 7, because she just went into that whole year trusting. I mean, she's just a kid. And she didn't really think, I have to protect myself, or I have to be careful about how I speak about myself. I think she wandered into that space expecting it all to be okay, and it wasn't. And that set up this low-level bullying, I suppose, and excluding, because she was this different kid. That escalated over time. And so it's the subtle stuff of not being invited to parties and not being asked to do group assignments and not engaging with her at lunchtimes. Things like that.
It was very problematic for the school. They were not ready. So we saw a paediatrician, and the paediatrician had said to Meg, you just be whoever you want to be. I had to actually do my own background work to be able to protect her in her transition. So I went through the education legal bulletins and worked out what I was able to protect her with and what I could educate the principal on, because she'd never heard of gender dysphoria, which my child was diagnosed with. The first 2 terms, the teacher had no idea about gender dysphoria. So the kindergarten teacher, I was updating her constantly, and I felt like I was doing the work, all of the work, actually, to protect my child. So educating the teacher, telling her, because they just had no idea what to do. There were no policies. They had no idea how to educate the rest of the school, the teachers, the kids in the classroom. At Meg's older brother's school, there's a big mural. They're very gay and very proud. In the secondary school, it's very proactive. In primary, absolutely nothing. It's too scary. There are no books. I think the teachers in kindergarten tried to put in a book about a panda who didn't know who he was, and there were parents complaining about that. There's nothing visual at all. There's nothing. There's no support groups. It's not talked about. It's almost like, well, Meg's teacher said to me in a meeting, I avoid talking about transgender stuff. I avoid gender dysphoria. I avoid anything to do with gender or the LGBTQ community because that is not my role. It is not my role to teach that. It is not my role in the school to teach other children about that. It's got nothing to do with me. I think that's probably indicative of a lot of teachers. It's not their role to teach gender stuff. That's the parents and the doctors. It's got nothing to do with them. So avoiding the topic at all costs is paramount.
Asha was bullied a lot in Year 7. The school did a whole gender thing in Year 7 actually, and they had masculine traits and feminine traits in columns. And somebody else in the classroom said, "Asha, you're right there in the middle." He was sort of read as slightly gender non-conforming for want of a better description, but only slightly. And as a result, he was a target for one kid in particular. It lasted 6 months. And in the end, I went to the deputy's office and I said, "I have done everything I can. There's nothing else I can do." And he said, "Yeah, that kid comes from an incredibly conservative background and Asha is clearly from a very progressive background. You couldn't get 2 more opposed kids." He said, "If he's not doing well socially, we'll just change his class." And he moved him out of that class on the spot. The fact that the school considers social well-being to be absolutely intertwined with education is critical. If you're not happy socially, if you're not confident in your belonging, in your sense of belonging, you can't learn. If you're constantly on the defensive, how do you engage academically? Asha's had issues. He's had times when things socially weren't working terribly well and that kind of stuff. But there's never been a sense that he didn't belong at that school.
Emma did eventually get to stand up and talk about how she identified. And they read the I Am Jazz book, which was one from our personal library that she'd taken into school. They read it in Emma's class and the 2 other classes that were from her year group. They also read it in Marnie's, her older siblings' class, because Marnie had said that the kids there knew Emma as a boy and she was quite worried that they wouldn't understand or accept what was going on. She didn't want to be teased or have to explain it to every single person. The school was reluctant to put out transgender education to all the students, so it was really just Emma's year group, which was Year 3 at the time, and Marnie's, which was Year 5 at the time. I guess people talk, so it just evolved. I did not have a single parent have a go. It was universally accepted and wonderful comments from everybody. Great, really great.
Geordie sought out a peer group in high school who was more akin to her, if you like. So her group is young people who are exploring their sexuality. A couple of her friends are trans, identify as trans. A couple identify as homosexual or lesbian. So the whole group, well, they've kind of found each other. This is a group of kids who are identifying quite diversely. The school itself does have a support club. That's on a Friday. It's very popular. However, Geordie is suffering with a lot of anxiety through feelings of exclusion, wider feelings of exclusion. So we're going through a whole process of psychiatry at the moment and antidepressants, because even though there is this group, the wider impact of the school, which is very heteronormative and cisgender, is actually having quite a negative impact on her. Rather than the school doing any kind of adjusting or addressing, it's been, let's counsel Geordie, rather than the school doing anything different. The outcome of that has been for Geordie to go see the school counsellor and then adjust her student timetable. So last year, she only got half her grades. So she's a bright kid and she's being, well, it's this process of reducing rather than addressing the issues.
Despite the bullying, Asha's actually had a really good experience at school. When he started high school, his year advisor was also the rainbow advisor for the school. And when we met him on enrolment day, he complimented Asha's blue hair, apologised for the fact that his was black at the moment and said, Don't worry, it will be purple again soon. And like Wear It Purple Day was the biggest event of the year. It was huge. It was like a really big deal. And they had awards for the best dress. They made videos of it and kids did cartwheels and dancing. It was just incredibly celebratory and not serious. I think that that's been the biggest takeaway for me that I wouldn't have thought about before, was just making it fun.
I don't think a lot of the teachers are aware of the impact of the little tiny daily things that the school does. For example, even the enrolment form. I know even last year, Meg still had trouble when she logged onto the computer system because they set that up in kindergarten when they enroll. They set the login with her birth name. Every time she has a casual or a different teacher, her name pops up as Rory. So last time that happened, she walked out of the classroom and went. She just went to her safe space. It was too much and too overwhelming for her to see her name up on the computer in front of everyone as Rory. Again, I think it's just a systematic. There's nothing in place for schools to understand what's going on for these kids. Also, the peer social thing is really important. So when she feels like she's being laughed at or identified, the emotional impact on her is overwhelming. She doesn't know what to do with it. So the last term of school, she started self-harming at school in front of the kids. She's 8. She's in year 3.
There was a child who transitioned in year 6 at River School. It was just handled so beautifully by the school. Like, it was just the most perfect thing. They took all the kids in her year and had a separate talk with them and just talked about what was going to happen. Like, the child would come to school and she was going to have a different name and we're all going to try and use her new name. Sometimes we might make mistakes, but that's okay because we just apologise and move on. Like, everything was handled so beautifully. I know with that there were lots of discussions about gender. That was when River was in year 5 in a composite class of 5, 6. So they got all the 5, 6 kids together, that's right, and explained what was going to happen with the child coming to school with a different name and in a girl's uniform and all that kind of thing.
In January, we wrote an email to the Anglican school that our child Bridget was going to, and we said, this is the story. Our child is transgender and she wants to come back to school as a girl. The first thing they said was, they've never had a transgender kid at the school, which obviously can't be true, given that 1.3 or 1.5% of all young people these days identify as transgender. But that was their view. We don't have the resources and facilities, particularly bathrooms or change rooms, to accommodate her, which is also a false and ridiculous idea. She just wanted to use the girls' ones. Then they said, and in addition, we think it will be necessary for us to write a letter to the entire school telling the parents that we've got a transgender kid at the school. And as a consequence, there's a good chance that your daughter and your son will be bullied at school. I got off the phone and talked to my husband. We were very, very upset because in a way for us, it was a kind of predictor about some of the discrimination that she might face in the world. You know, the informal, implicit kind of discrimination involved. It wasn't like, oh, well, your daughter's going to be expelled, we're not having her. It was just that they were doing everything that they could to convince us that we should take her out, because the unspoken fact was she was going to be. They would make her feel unwelcome in the school. We didn't know what to do. We were really, really struggling, and she'd only been out for a few months and she was, of course, struggling. So we sent an email to the school saying, fine, we'll just take the child out of the school. And that was in January, in the first week of January, and she didn't have a school to go to. It was massive for us.
As my daughter Geordie built her identity of herself, she also learnt how to trust or not trust the space. You know, how trustworthy it was or how dangerous it was for her. That was where the shutting down, I think, started to occur. So whenever I've gone up to see the school, and I've done that from year 7 and year 8, I've always said to Geordie, do you want me to talk about your sexuality? And she's like, yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, because I think we probably need to talk to the teachers about this, because I think it's actually part of the factor of peer harassment. We've had the conversation and I've said to the teachers, I need you to watch out for this not being a reason for the bullying or exclusion or these microaggressions. I've been very clear with the teachers that they need to know who Geordie is as a student and what my expectations are, that she should still have a safe and full education. There would be acknowledgement, certainly on the part of the teachers, but the reality was there's nothing. The answer is, well, we have this LGBTIQA club on a Friday. They don't do things like wear it purple day. They don't do that. They do let students wear small rainbows for Pride Month, but that's about it. So it's really peripheral. When I've asked for stuff, they've kind of voiced an indication of support, but it's just not embedded in the school.
River decided that we would go and speak to the year advisor, who's really lovely, and I was confident. I had talked to him earlier in the year. He was amazing and had thought of every conceivable question and had answers to everything, like, what toilets do you want to use? You can use the disabled toilets. What about after PE when you need to get changed? You can use those toilets there. You don't have to use the change rooms. What uniform do you want to wear? Do you want me to talk to other teachers about it? Are any of the teachers splitting the class into boys and girls for lesson things? Just an amazing list of questions. He then made sure that their report card was gender neutral. He spoke to all the staff members at the school. He said it was easier to just talk to all the teachers rather than just the teachers that had River, because they're all going to have them at some point. So it's easier to just start off, tell everyone. A few of the teachers actually came and apologised to River because they had done class activities that involved splitting the class into boys and girls, and they realised now that's not okay and they're not going to do that anymore, which was really just so kind of them to acknowledge that they'd done that. A few teachers have made some, misgendered them and just apologised and moved on, and it's not been a big deal.
Teachers at Meg's school are doing what they can. So next year, Meg's teacher is going to have a theme of rainbow through her class to try and... They're just doing the best they can with what limited information they have. The school does try and help Meg. They had a whole school dance musical with a rainbow theme. Meg was on stage for the first time in a ballerina outfit. She was so happy. So I think schools are doing what they can. They're trying really hard to... I know Meg's teachers, they are aware that every decision they make will impact on Meg's mental health. Even if it's in 10, 15, 20 years, that's a big call. That's a really big call for a teacher to make.
There are a couple of incidents where the boys had been climbing over the cubicle because Emma wouldn't pee at the urinal and standing up in front of everybody. She didn't want to have to go in there anymore because these kids were climbing over saying, "What have you got? You got a big willy going on in there or something." So she'd come home and do a giant wee, and then she'd be fine. That was happening on a fairly irregular basis, so she was missing quite a bit of school because she couldn't pass urine and was getting stomach aches and things from holding on. So the school I guess, were becoming more and more aware that this was a problem. Because I'd talked to them about the toilet issue and other things like getting changed in the classroom as they did for swimming lessons. She wouldn't do that. So I said to them, can we get her into the toilets and get her changed there? Emma had said she wanted to go to the girls' toilets and the school were a little reluctant initially. But I said that that was a law, that if a person identified as that gender, then they were to go to that toilet. And I pointed out that it was more inappropriate for her to be going to a urinal with boys when she's a girl. That in a girls' toilet, all the cubicles have doors. There's toilet etiquette. You go into a toilet, you close the door, you come out, you wash your hands and you leave. So when we discussed that, they became okay with it. Yeah, they told the boys about the toilet etiquette, and they also let the parents know that there had been this incident. So they individually spoke to each parent. Then the boys apologised to Emma and she accepted that that was okay. But from then on, she went to the unisex toilets, which is what they renamed the disabled toilets as. They actually took the sign off and put up unisex.
So we went around networking as much as we could and asked people about a particular school. We sold our house and we moved because you have to be in the catchment area to go to that school. We rented a house and we got Bridget into a school a week after school started in January. And at first it went okay. The school has diversity as one of their slogans and they committed to making it work. But very soon she started being bullied, like really, really seriously. So for example, there were some kids that lived near us we were renting, year 9 boys, and they were following her around the school, flicking up her skirt. Then when she was walking home from school, they'd come past on their bikes and they'd push her over. Even when they were running athletics, they would form a circle around her and just jostle and push her. Even in the corridor, they would shout across the corridor. And yeah, I was reporting this to the school, but they weren't able to do anything. So Bridget was actually becoming terrified, and she wouldn't go to school. And I was trying to work, but I was having to drop her off at the time the bell rang and fetch her when the bell rang. And when I spoke to the school, they just said, well, look, if your daughter will come and point to the pictures of all the relevant kids and we will deal with it. But she wouldn't do that because she was too afraid to do that. Because the kids live near us, like 50 metres away. And they used to walk past our house every day to and from school. So, yeah, eventually I just gave up and I said, okay, well, we're going to look elsewhere. But anyway, now in the most recent school Bridget goes to, she goes to karaoke club and the deputy principal goes along. And he sings with her and karaoke and so on. And when I spoke to him about it and I said, oh, thanks for doing that. It's really cool. And he said, no, I know. I need to show the other kids this is a school kid and we're with her and we support her. So they very consciously show the extra support to the trans kids so that other kids know that. The teachers know that the child is trans and that they're on her side. Like they're with her, they're looking out for her. And it's been a very significant thing for her, that he likes her and that he does this with her. She's not aware, obviously, of why, but, they make a special effort to align themselves with vulnerable kids. And I think that's necessary in schools,
In part 3, Ways Forward, parents talk about what schools can do. Parents share their ideas about how teachers and schools can support gender and sexuality diverse children into the future. Here, the 6 voices presented are an amalgamation of parent voices from across the research, including the original 6 parents seen in parts 1 and 2.
My state put together some resources that were supposed to be guidelines.
I think they need to have a list of resources in school available to all the teachers.
They weren't guidelines. The way they were framing it was like support for gender diverse children. The first thing that it talked about was that at the core of all of our policy decisions is the well-being of students. But then there was nothing that said, how do you actually ensure the well-being of a trans child?
My recommendation is we need policies in place. We need really strong, strict, protective policies in place that protect teachers and the kids. I think that's the way forward.
Also, teaching classes in university before the student teachers graduate.
Yeah, and what gets me is advising kids that calling another an anti-gay slur is against school guidelines is totally insufficient. Why is it against school guidelines? How can it make another person feel? And what impact can it have on another person? That sort of thing needs to be taught to teachers so that they can in turn communicate it to the kids and lead by example. Authentic example, not just an example of blindly following school guidelines to comply.
Schools could do more as a curriculum, not as like you've got a transgender kid, let's address this one person. They do stuff for culture. Like, I know they talk about Diwali and Ramadan, but I don't think that they identify that gender is also a broad thing and people have different genders and sometimes identify in different ways.
When is the LGBTQ committee coming to schools? Where do they get a voice? Is there a committee at school? There should be one. Why don't we have an LGBTQ committee at the school? We have programs for ESL students. We have programs for everything else, but we don't even have a voice for parents of LGBTQ students to come forward.
River got their period for the first time, and that was really distressing. It was really hard to find information about kids that identify as gender neutral getting their period. Like, there's stuff around transgender young people, but I kind of felt like there was a little bit of a gap there.
I've been thinking about how that's going to work out for Emma, because she's going to be given the pack with the tampons and the pads, and she's never going to have any use for any of that. She's going to want to know how girls develop, but she's going to feel in this strange place.
Yeah, that's probably been the biggest hurdle, the body changes. I don't feel like they've done much about it at school. Like, I don't think they've talked about the difference between gender and sexuality or sexual preferences.
I think it should be compulsory in all schools that they have to have an LGBTIQ focused term where that's all they focus on in health and physical education. They get decent content and material, and the teacher who's running it must be trained in it, you know?
I think there needs to be a trained counsellor employed in every school who understands the issues and has regular contact with the parents, not ad hoc.
I like the idea of schools having access to a gender counsellor that they can call on for support if they need it.
Simply saying that you don't support anti-LGBTQI activity is insufficient. Educators need to understand and appreciate the complexity of what our kids are going through. The trauma that is involved to even be able to get to the point of coming out and then being expected to just get on with it amidst an environment of very little compassion is ludicrous. Our children are in a mental health crisis. Trans kids are 10 times more likely to kill themselves, and gay kids are 6 times more likely. This is totally unacceptable. The changing of policy and guidelines is great, but it's not enough. There needs to be training on the emotional toll on our children and ways to foster inclusivity.
What schools need to have across the board is annual mandatory education, which they do currently for mental health, but they need to do it across this topic as well. I think anybody who's in the teaching space has an obligation to know how to support these kids.
I think the way forward is to not only educate the school staff and students, but the broader community on the gender diversity that exists. Even if the school and educators are equipped and extensively trained in understanding and supporting gender diverse students, without bringing this understanding to the broader community and parents, bullying, discrimination, and isolation will continue. Viewing gender diversity as an impairment only exacerbates the negative stereotypes and deficit viewpoint towards this group of children. Unless this view is changed from the top through policy to the bottom within pedagogy and practice, our children will always be viewed as outside of the norm and treated that way.
From my experience, a lot of the support is left up to the teachers that are either LGBTQI openly themselves or those that are very supportive of the community. The support group in my child's school was set up by 2 gay teachers. I feel this is done from a level of support generated from personal experience, which is wonderful. However, I see no training in place for the other teachers.
I asked my child if they felt there was anything they would change at school, and they said that they wished that teachers didn't separate things by gender for activities, as they were always separated from their friends, which made them upset and anxious. They really hate sport and physical education for this reason.
I wish they didn't separate kids by gender, ever. Every school should have a neutral uniform option. No more gendered buckets for lunchboxes in kindy.
We need gender-neutral toilets at every school, and not what I saw at my daughter's school recently, like a big sign up near the loos, near the front office saying, transgender toilets. I'm sure someone very well-meaning put that up, but like, really? It means anyone using the toilet is declaring to the whole school, hey, everyone, I'm transgender.
I guess it would have been nice for my child's teachers to know what to do, but in their defence, if they haven't had a transgender child before, it's hard for them to know. But it would be good for them to have the answers, not for me to have to go out and work out what my child's rights at school were. Of course, I did that, but not every child is going to have someone that will do that for them.
I'd probably like some standard resources for the schools so that all schools got some books about that sort of thing that became part of the curriculum. We need cross-curricular inclusion of gender and sexually diverse stories at all stages. This is not a scary or a difficult thing. It just means that teachers need to be mindful of not just defaulting to stories with a white mummy and daddy and a girl wearing a dress and a boy kicking a football. Oh, there are so many different stories to choose from and to share with every kid in their care. Just give the kids some choices and honour their choices without making a big deal of it.
At my son's school, they've got posters all over the school. There was this rainbow notice board for stuff going on that's relevant. I would say making it cool is probably the biggest thing. Straight up pride in having these students at the school, in celebrating the fact that they're here and that we're proud to call them our own, that this is part of who we are.
I gave my daughter's teacher some books that I thought could help. If the teacher just read the books to the class, they could help kids understand my daughter's experience. And they were age-appropriate books about just gender. They weren't even about trans kids necessarily, just describing identity and gender and stuff like that. She read one of them on the very last day of term. It was the most ambiguous book there was, so that didn't really help, but my daughter was happy, so that was really all that mattered.
Leaders and policymakers need to stand up to prejudice and hate speech. When the former Prime Minister says things about gender whisperers and letting kids be kids, it lets our gender diverse kids know that the PM, the most powerful person in the country, thinks that they are abnormal or even they don't really exist.
I think politics in Australia, unfortunately, uses the schools as fodder for their agendas. I think that's exactly what happened during the marriage equality vote. Like, that would have been a great opportunity for the schools to change their tune and do some positive lessons about just general acceptance and well-being and all that sort of stuff. It's all missed opportunities. You have teachers having to be the customer service agent of public opinion. That's not really what they're there for. So I feel like governments should stick up for teachers' ability to keep kids safe while they're in their care.
It starts with the leaders in our educational fields better grasping the realities and equitable needs of our gender diverse children to ensure they have as many opportunities to succeed in life and employment as any other child.
Don't confuse sexuality with gender expression. Don't perpetuate misinformation about child sex changes. Don't encourage stories about girls not being safe in school toilets. And stand up to people who do spread and perpetuate all of these misunderstandings. Be an ally and be assertive about it.
Our thanks to all who have made a contribution to this research. We're optimistic that, together, we can make a positive difference to the lives of gender and sexuality diverse young people at school. For online professional learning resources for teachers, or for more information about the research on which this film draws, please visit westernsydney.edu.au/GSDS/home.